Hey, this is a short video on how to create backup loot rooms in Rust. So basically the idea is if you have more than one room with boxes, you can link them up using the crafting system and electricity, and then when raiders get close to your main loot room, the system will activate and send all of that loot off to one of the secondary loot rooms. How it works is there's a seismic sensor in each room, and it gets triggered once it detects an explosive, sort of within range, which is about 4 meters. And then that room that's been triggered can't receive any loot back. So in this example with 4 rooms, raiders basically have to raid all 4 rooms before they'll get your loot. So if we have a look at the crafting system, you've got 2 conveyors. One of them brings pipes into the loot room, and then the conveyor on the bottom takes the loot out of the loot room. So all of these coloured pipes are coming from the other 3 loot rooms, and basically they come up here, they flow up to the top, form into a grey pipe, go through a conveyor, and then that grey pipe goes across all of the boxes and delivers the loot into them. So if you have a look at the bottom conveyor now, the blue pipes are the one that pump the loot out of the loot room, and so there's a splitter below the conveyor, and that splits it into 3 paths for all of the other secondary rooms. So when that seismic sensor gets triggered, that conveyor automatically turns on, and then that loot gets pumped out of there. Jumping into the electricity now, each loot room has its own solar panel, because you don't really need much power, and then each loot room should have its own battery, just to make sure that it's separated from the main electrical system. This electricity setup uses bugger all power anyway, so if you've got a medium battery then it'll last a really long time if your power source, your solar panel, does get raided. The power from the battery comes down via that black wire, goes into your branches, so you've got 3 branches there. You actually only need 2, because I realized afterwards that you don't need to plug in the button. And then out of those branches comes the white wires. Those white wires indicate the powering of devices, so that one powers the conveyor, that one powers the memory cell, and then that one powers the seismic sensor. For the seismic sensor, I'd recommend using 4 meters. If you put it on a 1 foundation, then that's just enough of a range to cover that single loot room. The memory cell is actually pretty straightforward. You can basically treat it like a branch. So that light blue wire, that is by default where the power is coming out of. So we run power into it from the branch, and then it comes out by that light blue wire. It then follows that light blue wire up to the top conveyor and is plugged into the power in port. The seismic sensor is plugged into the memory cell via that orange cable, and basically what the orange cable means is that if the memory cell is triggered from its default state, the light blue one, into its active state, which is the orange one, then the power will shift over from the blue one to the orange wire. What that does in practice is it disconnects the power from the top conveyor, and then it turns on the bottom conveyor. The bottom conveyor is actually powered by one of the branches via that white line. The orange cord is plugged into the turn on port, not the power in port. The way memory cells work is that the transition from its default state, which is that light blue line, through to the active state, which is the orange line, is a one-way thing. This means that once it's been triggered by the seismic sensor, it can't trigger back and mess up the system, so the raiders can't force it to go back the other way. This means that in order to reset it, you've kind of got to manually plug that button that's shown on the screen into the middle port on the side, and then you hit the button, and that's the only way to reset the memory cell to its default state, the light blue line. As I said before, unlike how I've got it shown here, you don't actually need to power that button from the branch down below, because you pressing it generates an electrical current by itself. I've taken the button off the wall. You don't actually want those buttons showing on the wall when your system is all set up, because you don't want your raiders to be able to reset it. So you just plug the button in whenever you need to reset the system, and then you take the button down again. After you've plugged the button in and reset the memory cell, you also need to turn that bottom conveyor back off, because it would have turned on. So here I'm going to show you an example of how it works once you start getting raided. When I trigger the system, you see that the lights on the memory cell are both being green, which indicates that it's in its active state, that orange line. And once that's done is it's cut the power to the top conveyor because the blue line no longer has power, and then it's turned on the bottom conveyor. So the boxes aren't taking any more loot in, and they're pushing any loot that they do have out to the other rooms. Looking at our other rooms now, you can see that some of those boxes have got items in them. So now we can see what happens if raiders get to your second loot room. We'll trigger the sensor, and then we'll see how the items go to only the 2 rooms that are still available. They haven't been raided yet. Items won't go back to that original room that we started with. And the same thing here. If we pretend this is the 3rd room that's been raided, the items will now go out of this chest and they'll go to room A, which is the only room that hasn't yet been raided. And that's it. Hope you learned something new, and thanks for watching.